Have you ever walked by people at the Barmas Group and you don't know who's a member and who's not, and you don't know the story about different people? And believe me, I'm very fortunate because I get to meet and talk to a lot of you and hear your stories. Willem and I knew each other probably 35 years ago, and then lost contact with each other. He became a Barmas Group member just recently. And I got to hear his story. And I said, Willem, you got to tell your story. So he's here to tell you. So meet Willem DeGoede.
So I'm Willem DeGoede. Meet Willem DeGoede. That's me. I'm from Holland. That's where my accent is from. Wooden shoes, windmills, tulps. That's Holland. My dad, I grew up in a family of 7 kids. My dad was a pastor in the inner city of Rotterdam. And eventually I ended up in the Dutch Navy as a Navy SEAL and became a pretty wild individual, and went on the Merchant Marine and was a sailor for a couple of years. And I know my parents, like all you guys, they were praying for me. And they said, please have him find some Christian woman. And here, missionary family came from America and had a daughter with them. And I saw the daughter. I fell in love, and we came to America. Well, when we came to America, it was a shock for me. I had a dual engineering degree, but when you come to America and you don't speak the language, it's fairly tough. And my first job was moving pianos and digging swimming pools by hand. I thought the rich people couldn't afford, a bulldozer, so they had this big Dutchman picking up, dirt and doing it. And in the meantime, my wife and we prayed and we lived together, and I clearly had given my life to Christ. And God started blessing me beyond most people can imagine. I mean, I started as a maintenance guy, oiling machines. And slowly but sure, through the years, I grew up in the company, and our kids grew up. And we had a daughter, and I wanted to write a book to all these people and say, your kids are obnoxious in restaurants and stuff like that. Let me tell you how to do it. Then we had our son, and I burned my own book because I realized I didn't know nothing. Yeah. And he became a troubled teen. Slowly but sure, at 12, 13, he started falling with the wrong crowd, and drugs got involved, and schools didn't like him. And I started focusing on work. And I had some special gifts given by God to set myself apart. And I slowly but sure grew in the company. And over the next 25 years, I made 25 promotions, and I became president of a pharmaceutical company. It was right here in Irvine. It was called McGaw, and I told doctors and scientists what to do and ran the company. And you'd think, well, here's a guy coming. But the more I focused on my work, the more my wife said, you're changing. I'm not changing. I mean, I'm just like to tell people what to do. And eventually, we got bought by B. Braun. And B. Braun was a German company, and they made me COO of North America and CEO of the Caribbean. So I regularly had to go to Puerto Rico and the Dominican. And I said to my wife, really, the future, if I one day want to run all of B. Braun, I got to go to the East Coast. And I moved my wife and potentially my kids. They didn't come to the East Coast. And I started flying. We had companies in Malaysia, in Brazil, in Europe, here in America. Had close to 10,000 people working for me, and life was good. But what became important to me was all what the world has to offer. I mean, in one time I cared about cars. I mean, when I came here, all we had is a post-mill Jeep I bought for $500. My wife said, what does it matter? And clothes became important. And the way you come in a restaurant and, they treat you. And she said, you're no longer the guy I married. And I said, at work, they say I'm the greatest thing that walks around. So somewhere, you got to look different. Well, where it went, and I hope that this is a lesson for everybody, because if you give your life to Christ, somewhere you decide to make him Lord of your life. And you give him the authority to meddle in your business. And people came in my office and were talking about issues of cancer with their wives, and I was more concerned of what was going to impact their work. Then I said to them, can I pray with you? My focus had shifted. And one day, about 9 years ago, I was doing a presentation to doctors and nurses and scientists about a new product we developed. And I felt something burst in my head, and I ended up with a dual aneurysm. And I stroked while they did the brain surgery on me. And I woke up, and I had problems talking, no longer could control my emotions, and basically was paralyzed on the right side. And all that I could do is look up. When you look up, I looked at God. And the one thing I knew for sure, that God loved me. He loved me. Why would he allow this in my life? And I realized he wanted to redirect me because I had forgotten the purpose of this life. And I started changing, and I started getting my emotions, and my movement came back. But the first year I was sitting in a wheelchair, and it was very humbling. And it was a big change. But in the meantime, the woman I had for the last 10 years said, what a nag. Every time I traveled, she's nagging again. And she goes, I'm not nagging. I was traveling 24, 25 days out of the month. And she goes, for what? And now this woman had to take care of me on a daily basis, and I realized what God had given me in her, what a godly woman she was, all the things I started looking at which were great in her, I had appreciated for the last 10 years. My son, who had been for 20 years an addict, and I had only thrown money at it with lawyers to keep him out of jail, but always didn't work. I became his father instead of his friend, and we built a relationship. And now, just a week ago or 2 weeks ago, Renee and I, my wife's name is Renee, we could speak in San Clemente High School in front of, 500 students and talk about the experience of our life. And my son now, 5 years sober, he just graduated from Vanguard University. It's a great accomplishment. I would say, I like to finish with the part, if we give our life to God, we give him the right to do with us what we need to do, because he wants the glory. It is nothing what we can do. In the wheelchair, I realized I could barely breathe on my own unless God allowed me to breathe. So, with this Barnes group, so many Christians, so many great ministries, but at the end of the day, it's all God's work. All right, thank you very much. Here comes Vanna White.
This is Renee. Next time you walk by somebody here, you might want to stop and ask their story. So.